Hello, Philip.
Good afternoon, Nick.
So, I didn't know the RAF had any planes to lease out to begin with. Have they got that right?
Oh, they've got that completely right. This is the Voyager Fleet, and what the Voyager Fleet is provided by a private company. It is leased to the RAF, and what they do is they provide the big air passenger transport aircraft and the big refueling aircraft that we see. So Boris Force One, as is known, is provided by this leasing deal, and the RAF have leased 14 what they call multi-role tanker transport aircraft, of which they only need 9 on a routine basis, and the others are then allowed to be leased out to civilian contractors or elsewhere by the company that's providing them. So it saves the Ministry of Defence money, and all we're doing is it makes economic sense to bring 1 or 2 of those back under RAF control.
So it's entirely reasonable that if Rishi Sunak gets the go-ahead, we can, probably with penalty charges, but we can cancel a contract and say we need 2 or 3 planes back or whatever we need to start flying people abroad. Do you think that's quite a reasonable proposition then? It's got legs.
It's reasonable, and it doesn't require any contracts to be cancelled. This is part of the contract that those aircraft are on call for the RAF whenever they need them, and the RAF are there to support government policy. It makes sense to do this rather than to try and go through down an even more expensive line of hiring completely civilian aircraft and paying commercial companies a fortune.
But this is a good idea, isn't it? Because it means presumably Border Force and military will be persuading these people to get on the plane. You can imagine the scenes at Heathrow Airport or wherever it was with the civilian airline. This is going to be a much more controlled method of getting people actually onto the planes, isn't it?
Oh, very much so. And you've got people who are part of a contract that is negotiated with the government. They're contracted with the government. The aircraft that are flying for the RAF, there's civilian crews that help fly and operate them alongside the military. So this will allow the Border Force and the police. I don't think the military are going to get involved in getting people out of the country, but Border Force and police will be able to get people onto the aircraft. It can be done on military bases. It doesn't have to be done on in public airports and all the rest of it, and take a lot of the sting out of what is become, in public eyes, a divisive policy.
It's certainly become a divisive policy, but it's also, in many people's eyes, become a shambolic policy because, my goodness, I cannot remember when we first started talking about this. So it's been going on for a long time. It's got lots of political context around it because of the ECHR. I don't know if, like me, how closely you follow this aspect of it, because there's enough going on in the world to keep you busy. But I'm beginning to get a sense, actually, that this might actually happen. What point will they have to say, we want these planes in advance of when they want to ship people out? Because the minute they get the go-ahead, they're going to do it, aren't they? How much notice do you think they'll have to give?
Well, I'm not sure what the contract says in notice, but I'm sure because it's come into the press now that someone somewhere in the Ministry of Defence has pushed that little button to say, give us another couple of aircraft, please. So the preparations are underway. And as soon as the legislation gets back from the House of Lords, gets re-voted on again in Parliament after the Easter break, then I think there will be a political imperative to get, even if it's half a dozen, it doesn't matter, to get some people on an aircraft on its way to Rwanda, and then for that to continue. So I can see it happening. Is it going to make a massive difference? No, unless you can communicate to those that are illegally crossing the channel that this path is expanding and growing, and they're wasting their thousands of euros in giving it to those illegal people smugglers, and they're not going to achieve what they want to achieve.
Well, I'd like to think that there's someone in the communications department at Number 10, and they have enough people on the payroll there, who's already working up a targeted campaign to get that message out there. And no doubt they'll want to tell the electorate, but they need to get as many people out there knowing what's going on. Listen, Philip, can I just draw you down another road, which I didn't give you fair warning on this, so you every right to say, oh, get lost, Nick. I'm not going to talk about this because I haven't read up on it. But we saw, I think it was in the Telegraph today, the idea that in looking at a war situation, remembering that the Defence Secretary, Grant Shapps, has said we're in a pre-war environment, that apparently the government's preparations haven't gone too well for what a war environment may be. Ministers haven't been shown their bunkers or haven't bothered to go and have a look at their bunkers and all this stuff. I'm sort of taking a slightly jaundiced view here, and I'm actually wondering and asking people what they think the future war space could be if Britain went to war in defence of its country as opposed to a military adventure abroad. And I'm suspicious that it will be a very technological warfare that could all be over rather quickly. How worried should I be that cybersecurity, artificial intelligence could effectively bring the country to its knees before a tank had rolled off a ship?
Oh, crikey, how long have you got for me to answer all of that? We are on a path to war. There's no doubt about that. Given what the major conflict that's happening in Europe, the destabilization in the Middle East, and what China's doing aggressively in Southeast Asia. That doesn't necessarily mean that war is inevitable, but government departments need to prepare, not just within their department, but they also need to work together. In 1994, the Minister of Defence wrote an internal memo to turn around and say it would take 4 years of notice and 2 years of preparation for the Ministry of Defence to get prepared for conflict. That's not bringing all the other departments together. Now, conflict, if it came to the UK from a defence perspective, there'd be a lot of electronic elements to it, but the way society is operating in the country would fall apart, and local governments and central government need to understand how to work together to get those things, the essential elements, still operating. And that isn't happening, unfortunately. They're looking at single individual scenarios and going, we've looked at a mass casualty event here, or we've looked at a train crash there, or we've looked at a computer meltdown here. But they're not bringing it all together and everything happening at one time. And that's wrong.
Is there I suppose, final question on this one. Is that about complacency because we don't really think it's going to happen, or we've just been preoccupied with, if you like, assisting in Ukraine, military adventures abroad, obviously international affairs, and not perhaps looking at our own shores?
First rule of government is to protect our own country. They're not doing it, so that's complacency, full stop. We saw that.
It's that bad, is it?
Yeah, we saw that in the reaction to the COVID crisis, and that should have stimulated more interaction between government departments, and it hasn't. And if the government does this, it'll save us money, because as the departments start to work out how they interact with each other, they'll find out how to do what they're supposed to do more efficiently. If they have to spend money in getting stuff done, that money will be spent in companies and with people inside the UK, so it will generate more jobs, it will generate more tax income and everything else. It's a no-brainer. The time wasted in planning the time spent in planning is never wasted. And therefore, the more planning the government can do, the more efficient government is likely to be, the more efficient interaction with local governments is likely to be, and the greater cost saving is likely to be to the taxpayer.
Philip, rather disturbing to hear you say that, but as ever, wonderful to have you on the show. Basically, Philip saying, well, we are on a path to war, no doubt about it. He also added, doesn't mean war is inevitable.